I want you all for a minute, if you would, well, only if this applies to you, raise your hands if you have siblings. Okay, now just get them in mind for a moment, would you? Just get your siblings in mind for a moment. Just get all of their uniquenesses and their qualities and their quirks and their idiosyncrasies. Just get them in mind. Aren't they annoying? I mean, right from an early, I have fair dues. I have an elder brother and a younger sister. And right from the moment I can remember having any memory at all, I was always blown away by how different I was from them. I mean, right from didn't you get that? You just were immediately aware of how different you were from your brothers or your sisters. My brother and my sister both happen to be very musical. Me, I seem to have the musical gene surgically removed at birth somehow. I was more athletic than my brother. My sister was more athletic than both of us. In fact, annoying for brothers, but she took her musical ability and her athletic ability and we became a professional ballet dancer for 20 years. That's ballet, not belly dancer. Important distinction, I think, to make clear, but ballet dancer for 20 years. That was ballet, in case you're wondering what that was. That was me doing ballet. She became the dancer. I didn't, as you can see. Other differences slightly less obvious. I think I was more persistent than maybe my brother. He was more conceptual. There were differences in terms of how well we could make someone laugh, what our conceptual ability was, how strategic, just very small differences. And rather like you, I just felt from a very early age that the whole point of my life would be to find ways to identify what my uniquenesses were and figure out ways to employ them. I don't know where that would happen in my life or in my home or in my company, but I just felt as though the whole point of my life was oriented around this discipline. If we can put that one up, that I would build around my strengths and then find ways to manage around the stuff that I didn't have. I didn't have some of the stuff my brother had, and I didn't have some of the stuff my sister had. And so I've always felt, just from the get-go, whether I would have characterized it just that way, I don't know, but I always felt from an early age I was unique. I would have to find some place in which I could exploit that uniqueness. And I bet most of you, I don't want to speak for all of you, but I bet most of you on some level have felt something like that. You felt some uniqueness in you. You kind of knew it from a very early age. And you probably felt as though the purpose of your life was to figure out where are my strengths and how can I make a contribution around those strengths while managing around the weaknesses that I have. I bet most of you in this room feel that way. But if you do feel that way, I'm here to tell you that you're in a minority. As some of you may know, 7 years ago, I wrote a book, which maybe some of you have read, called Now Discover Your Strengths. In that book, there was a poll. It's one of the beautiful things about working for Gallup is if you had a question, you wouldn't have to sit around arguing about it. You could say, well, let's go ask everybody. Which is a powerful conversation ender over dinner. Let's just go ask everybody. We'll come back tomorrow, I'll tell you the answer. So here was the question that we asked. This is back in 2000. Remember, here's the question we asked everybody. Which do you think will help you be most successful in life? However you define success. Building on your strengths or fixing your weaknesses? Yeah, we know you both got strengths and you've got weaknesses. And if you can't ignore one or the other, but if you're going to come down on one side or the other, which side would you come down on? And we didn't ask everybody. We asked representative samples of the populations of the US, the UK, France, Canada, China, and Japan. So it was a lot of people. If right now you're thinking that the whole focus of your life from the time you were very young has been to identify your strengths and contribute them, if you're thinking that, if you're sitting there right now thinking that, you'd been a minority in every single country Gallup studied. Turns out the United States is the most strengths-focused nation in the world. This is back in 2000. Back in 2000, this was the percentage of people, the blue bar was the percentage of people who said, fixing my weaknesses, and the gold bar, people who said building on my strengths. 41% of people in America in 2000 said leverage my strengths. 59% of people said fixing my weaknesses. In Britain, where I'm from, that gold bar, 38% of people would bet their career, their success, their contribution, their service, their significance on leveraging their strengths. 38%. Canada, 38%. France, Well, who cares about France? That was a joke. That was a joke. As a little something I flatter myself to call English humor. Some of you may not be familiar with English humor. Some of you may think it's a contradiction in terms. Like English cuisine. But it does exist. It does exist, seriously. If I use it again, if you're listening along and you're thinking, well, was that supposed to be funny? Was it not supposed to be funny? If the hand goes up, if I raise my hand like this, it was hysterical. Okay? Just get the ground rules set. All right? So France, 35% of people said strengths, all the way down to the two least strengths-focused nations in the world, Japan and China. Japan and China, that gold bar in Japan and China is 24%. So 24% of people in those countries would bet their career, their success, their contribution, their service on leveraging their strengths. So, with all apologies to Madonna, it appears we live in a remedial world, right? We live in a world that is fascinated by weaknesses and tends to take strengths for granted. Everywhere you look, we seem to think that excellence, whatever that is just the opposite of failure. If you want to understand excellence, study failure. So, in order to learn about health, we study disease. In order to learn about joy and meaning and fulfillment and wisdom, we study depressed people. In order to learn about, seriously, how to engage our employees, we study the disengaged employees. In order to learn about great marriage, we study divorce. Everywhere you look, we seem to think that good is just the opposite of bad. If you want to get good, study bad and invert it. We're wrong. You study bad and invert it, you get not bad. Right? And that's just different than good or great. I mean, if you study, let's say you studied a bunch of divorced people, you know what you'd find? If you study divorced people, or people that are really unhappily married, let's just leave it at that. Study people that are really unhappily married, you find that unhappily married people argue a lot. I know, shocking, but it's true. It's true. Write this down. No one's writing this down. Write this down. But the strange thing is you study really happily married people and you find they argue just as much. The difference between a great marriage and a not so great marriage is what goes on in the space between the arguments. My point is whatever that is, and I don't know what that is. If my wife were here, she certainly would say I don't know exactly what that is because I'm no expert on marriage. My point is simply that if you wanted to learn about what makes an excellent marriage, you'll learn nothing about it from studying the rotten ones. You only learn about excellence from studying excellence. Well, as some of you know, and some of you have been on this train with me and with others for a while. And in fact, I wrote that book, Now Discover Your Strengths, sort of to fight against this idea that we ought to study failure to learn about excellence, and instead we should study strengths and success to learn about them. And I wrote the first line of the book, of the Now Discover Your Strengths book, the one that was written 7 years ago now, was one of those lines that you write. As a writer, you write it for you. It's sort of to get started. And I wrote this first line for me, sort of to get me going. I thought it would get cut out, but it wasn't cut out. It's still there. The first line of the book was, we wrote this book to start a strengths revolution. Well, you know, it's been 7 years now since that book came out. And all kinds of changes have occurred. You've probably seen some of those changes. Positive psychology. Who's familiar with positive psychology? Some of you maybe. A whole new movement in psychology. Martin Seligman began it. He was the past president of the American Psychological Association. He famously said, psychology's got it all wrong. We've got 40,000 studies on depression and less than 400 on joy. It's not that we shouldn't study depression, it's just that we ought to learn about joy and we ought to study it. A whole new movement in psychology has begun called positive psychology. And to know how powerful it is today, know this: the most popular elective class of any class on any subject at Harvard is an introduction to positive psychology. The United Nations used to characterize nations according to their vulnerabilities. Today it's changed so that today the United Nations characterizes countries according to their strengths. If your child happens to break the law in this country, they'll now be given a strengths assessment for juvenile justice, where they'll be asked strengths-based questions like, have you made any good changes in the past? If you made any changes today, who'd be the first person to notice those changes? You look around the world, you see all kinds of signs of change. If your family's in trouble and you go to family therapy in Australia or New Zealand, they'll take a strengths-based approach to helping you fix your family by figuring out, well, let's just start with what strengths do you have as a family? all the way around. I mean, if you Google the word strength space back in 2000, you know how many hits you got? If you Google it back in 2000, you got none. You know why? Google didn't exist back then. Some of you not following along, but that's okay. It's okay. Today, if you Google the word strength space, you get 42 million hits. The world's changing. And I tell you what, if you really wanted to change the world, I mean, if you really wanted to change the world so it was strength-based, not remedial, of course, the place where you'd begin is in schools, wouldn't you? You'd go to schools and you'd try and teach the kids how to think a wee bit differently. Because frankly, by the time I get people like you, you're far too old for me to do anything with. I'm sorry. We want to start early, don't we, with kids going, what are my strengths? I mean, I was probably 6 or 7 when I first felt, you know, I've got something to bring. Can I name it? Can I talk about it? Can I apply it? I was young. Let's start early with kids. And the funny thing is, if you charge around the country looking for a strengths-based curriculum, a strengths-based school, you know what you find? You find tons of great teachers and tons of great students, and you find no strengths-based schools. You'll find no strengths-based curriculum. You'll see some signs of it somewhere really early on, sometimes in Montessori, but you don't find strengths-based schools. At least I hadn't, until I came back to my office last October, and I found on my desk a stack of 60 letters, handwritten, from the students of a school in New Jersey. And they'd seen a film series that I'd done with the folks who did the Numa films called Trombone Player Wanted. And it's a 6-part film series, and they'd seen the first part of this 6-part film series. And I hadn't done it for school children, but somehow the headmistress had got a hold of it and played it to the girls of this school. And they'd watched it, and then they'd written to me saying, come here, come to Purnell, come to this school. We do things differently at this school. And it took a while to get everything worked out in terms of schedules, but I went up to Purnell in New Jersey and filmed a bunch of stuff. I wanted to show you a brief clip of what's going on in this school, if for no other reason than this. And this is how the headmistress described the school to me. She goes, in every single school in the country, in every single public school, there's a room where children go if they have trouble learning. There's a room where they go if they've got ADD or ADHD or dyslexia. There's a room they go. Our whole school is that room. This is a school for children who have struggled to succeed anywhere else. They've been told repeatedly that they have no strengths, nothing to offer. They have a big F on their back. And we found a way to help them discover that perhaps without being condescending and just being all about self-esteem, we found a way to help those girls look in the mirror and say, I do have something to contribute. Well, I was completely sold. She's a passionate person who's done some extraordinary things. Let's take a moment just to watch a 4-minute clip of what's going on in this one small school in New Jersey. Darren, can we go ahead and play that Purnell clip, please?
Girls with learning differences are out there growing exponentially. There's 1 in 5 girls out there and boys who are being diagnosed with learning disabilities. They go off, they get testing, and then there's nothing for them to do except fail.
Schools to me were just one big maze. You know, I had to find my way out of things. I raised my hand and asked my teacher a question, and it was like he completely ignored me. My last school couldn't find what was wrong. And they also didn't seem to want to commit. They were like, well, maybe you'll catch up later. I didn't feel smart enough or good enough.
I was told I was stupid and that I could never get anything done, so I just stopped going altogether.
A lot of times when they feel demoralized and their self-esteem starts to go down, they take their strengths and they put them in areas that are not good for them.
I just got involved in a lot of life-threatening, risky stuff.
I felt lost.
My school system would not decide if I was extremely smart or extremely stupid. Like, they would, they noticed that I was really excelling, like 1st grade, and they put me in the gifted and talented program. Right after that, they put me on Ritalin because I wasn't paying attention in class because I was bored.
What do you think would have happened to you if you hadn't come here?
I would either be living in my house and never leaving, like never going to school, drop out, or I'd be dead.
You think you'd be that?
Yes. I'm 98% sure that I would not be here living anymore.
When are people going to stop and say, isn't there something wrong with our system? We might be doing something wrong. We should be finding ways to identify the strength, isolate it, and build on it. So, if you're going to focus on what they do well and what they do right, you might not be spending so much time, energy, and money trying to refocus on what everybody's doing wrong. So we took that idea and we developed this program with it called the Affinities Program.
We have affinities so you can learn more about yourself and what you're good at. And I think it's a great thing. I'm sure a lot of people agree. It's a great thing.
It's like a spark point. You put what you love to do, what you're good at. Bam, there's a fire. You got it.
It's good if you know, but isn't it great if everyone knows what your strengths are here? So we have this thing called Affinities Wednesdays. And what happens is the girls say, I want to be in this. Then we sit down and we figure out what their strengths are and what their affinities are, what they like doing, as well as what they're good at doing and what they're strong at. And we combine those together, we put it in a presentation in front of the whole school and bring the girl up on stage.
Today, we're going to be talking about Tracy Lehrfeld's strengths.
We asked girls, who wants to do this?
Very dependable.
All of them. Every one of them wanted to get up there and do it.
Everyone has strengths. They are skills we possess and use every day, but we don't often reflect on them.
Girls have said, I don't know how I can get up there with all my strengths and not have kids just make fun of me. And that's what we said, that's the culture change, what we're going to do here. We're going to say, guess what? Claudia's competitive and she's an achiever, and she wants to win the award at the end of the year, and we're going to support her in that effort.
The entire school can see what your strengths are, what you like to do, what you're good at.
We're asking kids to have a whole different paradigm than their parents have or than other people have about how they think about other people. You know the feeling you get when you play a song that you really like and you get that like, yeah feeling? I actually get that from my job. And I think if everyone could have that, if every person could have that, this would be a different world. I want that for these girls.
Isn't that awesome? And as I said, this isn't some soft woman, gooey self-esteem curriculum. This is hard work. It's a 4-year curriculum designed to help these girls identify these strengths that they have and to use them. These girls now go on to Smith and to Vassar and to Harvard. Not that everyone should go on to a named college like that, but these girls have something to bring, and for years and years they've been told they were failures. So as I look around, I don't know about you, but as I look around, I see signs like at Purnell School. I see signs of change, that we're moving from a remedial world to a strengths-based world. And like you, maybe like you, I want to be accountable. I want to measure whether or not we're making a difference. So I've been repeatedly asking that same question again and again and again. Which do you think will help you be most successful? And it's been, 6, 7 years now. So now, after 6 years, this was in 2006, after all this great work, this was the poll in December. Today, this is the number of people in the US anyway, in 2006, who build on their strengths. So it's nice to know I'm making a difference. Actually, we've just been redoing the poll every 6 months, so about 3 weeks ago we did it again for the US. And now, here's where we are today. This is 2007. So we're back to exactly where we were back in 2000. In fact, never has one person had such measurable proof of his own irrelevance as I have this year. I mean, this is fun and everything, guys, but we're not making a difference. For those of you that think that you need to put your strengths in play to make your contribution to the world, remember, you're in a minority. Any person you bring on board into your church or onto your team or into your company is probably going to come from the blue bar, not the gold bar. They're probably going to make your team just a wee bit more remedial than they were before. But I tell you what, if you want to know whether or not you're living in a remedial world or you're leading a remedial team or a strengths-based team, you wouldn't just ask what people believe, would you? You'd ask what they do. You'd ask what percentage of a typical, here's actually the question. Let's just put that up. This is the question that we asked. What percentage of a typical day do you spend playing to your strengths? Don't put it up yet. Let's just hold it right there. Just hold it right there for a second. What percentage of a typical day do you spend playing to your strengths? Now, the context for this, right? The context for this is a world in which everybody says people are our greatest asset. People are our greatest asset. And the reason they say that, of course, is the value of most everybody in this room and everybody that you lead, the value of everybody lies between their ears, doesn't it? Your value, my value, lies in our creativity, innovation, good judgment, persistence, all that stuff. That's why you're such an asset, because if you leave, you take it all with you. You take it away from the team. That's why you're such an asset, because your value lies in your creativity, your innovation, your good judgment. But, none of you are creative, or innovative, or resilient in every single aspect of your role in life, are you? Come on, there's some aspects of the role that you're playing right now, not someone else's role. There's some aspects of the role you're playing right now where you aren't really very creative at all, are you? There are some aspects of your role where your first idea is not only your best idea, it's your only idea. Now you keep talking, because that's what you do, but there's nothing there, really, is there? And we all sort of know that. There's a part of your job where your life where you're wafer thin, or wafer thin, to quote Monty Python, where you're wafer thin, right? And there's other parts, again, a little English reference, but there's other parts of your whole life where you're incredibly creative and innovative, where it's one idea after another with you. Not every idea is a great idea, but there's a lot of them. And we look at you and we go, oh, wow, that's where we can rely on them the most. That's the play they should run. We know where that is with you. Let's call those something. Let's call those your strengths. Shall we? Okay, so when somebody says people are our greatest asset, that's not quite right, is it? What we really mean is people's strengths are our greatest asset, right? So with that in mind, what percentage of a typical day do you spend playing to your strengths? All right, that's the percentage in 05 of people who say most of the time. That's the percentage in 06, and that's the percentage in 07. And that's a tragedy. I'm not saying this happens everywhere. We've got, I know, a number of people here, 100 or so, from Chick-fil-A. If you go to the best restaurants at Chick-fil-A and ask that very question, there are some restaurants where 83, 84% of people strongly say that they play to their strengths most of the day. If I went into some of your teams, I bet there are some leaders in this room where I ask that very question, what percentage of a typical day do you spend playing to your strengths? And 80% of people would say most of the time. And there are perhaps some teams that you lead in this room where nobody would. But right now, we're at 12%. All of you felt when you were young, I bet, something like I felt. You felt special or unique or distinct, and you wanted to put that to work. You wanted to put your strengths to work. All these data suggest to me is right now most of us aren't. If you want to know what this whole strengths movement is all about, it's how on earth do we move that number? In a room of this size, it's like this lot over here. You lot, yes, well done, you lot. It's you lot who are yay, awesome work. Everybody else, sorry. We're not seeing the best of you. How do you move that number? As leaders, how do you move that number so that you really do get a chance to see the best of each person? I'd suggest there's two ways. First, as leaders, you could change your people systems. You could change the way you invite people onto your teams. You could change the way you talk to your people about their performance. You could change the way you do succession planning within your organization, your company, your church. You could change the systems. But I wouldn't suggest you start there. I would suggest you start here with self. After all, the airlines, they say a lot of daft stuff, don't they? But one of the truly smart things the airlines say, and they say it all the time, is this. They say, put your own oxygen mask on first before you charge around trying to help everybody else, right? So here's the question for us for the rest of the time that we have together. Are you one of the 12%? Are you one of the 12% that play to your strengths most of the time in life? And if you aren't, how'd you get to be? Are you one of the 12%? There's something special and unique and distinct and powerful about you. Are we seeing it? Are you one of the 12%? And if you aren't, how'd you get to be? Some of you may not be. Not because you don't know what to do, but because you believe the wrong things. I'd like to at least have you consider that what's stopping so many of us from putting our best foot forward, if you like, from putting our strengths forward every day, is that not that our leader doesn't let us, or our job puts us in a box, or some other external thing. It might be that we believe the wrong stuff. Here are three myths 3 myths that you need to look full in the face and blow up and install in their place 3 strengths-based truths. Here's the first one. Here's the first myth. As you grow, your personality changes. Most of us do believe that as you grow, your personality changes. 66% of us, in America anyway, believe that. And who wouldn't? As you grow, you put away the stuff that was childish of yours, you acquire more breadth, more balance, more experience, you become an adult. And we love stories of transformation like that. The Scrooge-like story, where people, they start off dumb and poor and they end up smart and rich. We love stories of transformation like that, and they make great stories. But remember, they're just stories. The truth is this. Let's have that truth up now, if you would. Thanks. The truth is, as you grow, you become more and more and more of who you already are. And if you don't believe that, just go to a high school reunion. It's the same people, isn't it? It's the same people. If I were to give you a personality test, any personality test, once a decade for the next 50 years, the most surprising discovery would be just how consistent your results would be across time. There are some small changes around the edges, but what's most amazing about giving someone a personality test over the course of their life is just how consistent it is. But most of us don't need personality tests to make that point. And most of us don't need to go to high school reunions. Most of us have kids. And our kids make the point, don't they? I mean, I got a couple. They're odd. My son, and they're differently odd, and it's kind of weird. They came out different, and they stayed different. My son, Jack, is, Jack's now, 6 years old. But already I know a lot about Jack. I know he's an incredibly structured person. This is the kid that won't close the fridge door unless the ketchup is turned so the label's facing out. This is the kid who, as I'm pushing a cart down the corridor in an airport, and he's walking beside me, I say, "Hey, Jack, jump on the cart. I'll push you around. It'll be great." This is the kid who very solemnly points to the little picture of the kid on the cart with the big red X through it. Also, he's deeply competitive. I mean, not in a way that every 6-year-old boy is sort of competitive. I mean in a way when he's seized by his competitiveness, he doesn't quite know what to do with himself. I mean, everything for him is about the score. He learned to read so he could figure out he's an Angels fan. I don't know why, he's a California Angels fan. So he would learn to read to figure out who was winning the games. I'm playing ping pong with him. The first game of ping pong I've ever played with him. I'm 1 minute into the first game of ping pong. And what does he ask? "What's the score? What's the score, Dad?" I'm like, "Well, there is no score, Jack. You have to be able to hit it back for there to be a score." Which I think goes in, but then 2 seconds later, it's like, "Well, what's the score now, Dad?" I'm like, "There's no score. No rally, no score." "You want a score, Jack?" 1-0 to me. 2-0 to me. 3-0 to me. Are you getting this, Jack? 4-0 to me. So... Kid's going to be in therapy for a while. But my point is that he's not going to grow out of that. The challenge for Jack is not how to replace that childish competitiveness with a more adult trait like collegiality. The challenge for Jack in life will be to channel that competitiveness productively, to find ways to channel it. And I hope as he grows up in life that he does. I hope he finds ways to put himself in situations where he can win. And I hope he stops crying when he loses. But I don't think he'll ever grow out of the craving. I don't expect he'll ever be a good loser. As a parent, I hope he's a gracious loser. I hope he has awesome manners. But I think he'll grow out to be one of those adults who says, "Hey, you show me a good loser, I'll show you a loser." And there are some of you in this room that are going, "Well, that's not very nice at all." And there's others of you going, "Yeah, Jack." Hey? And you know who you are. You know who you... If you've ever worked with someone like that, who's deeply competitive but covers it with a veneer of politeness, you can have a little fun with them. Have you ever noticed that as you walk down a corridor with them, they're always subliminally aware of being just a couple of centimeters ahead of you? Have you noticed that? Have a little fun. Gradually increase your pace. You can get them to break into a run. Seriously, just try it. Just try it. Here's the point. Jack's values will change. His dreams will change. His self-awareness will change. His maturity will change. His circumstances will change. But the core, the most dominant aspects of his personality will remain the same. And so will yours. And that's okay. The purpose of your life is not to grow into somebody else. It's to lead from where you are. From where you are. That doesn't mean you can't grow. But here we bump smack into the second myth. Here's the second myth. Let's have that one up, just the myth. The myth is that you'll grow most where you're weakest. That's why we're so fixated on weaknesses, not because we're perverse. We focus on weaknesses because we think it's smart. We think we'll grow most there. Hands up if you're a parent. Hands up if you're a parent. Okay, you're part of the problem. Gallup asked this question. Some of you are familiar with it, but here is the question. Your child comes home with the following grades. English, A. Social studies, A. Biology, C. Algebra, F. And here's the question. Which grade deserves the most attention from you? The question didn't say, if you pick one grade, you must ignore all other grades. The question just said, hey, look, as a parent, you only have one thing to invest in your child, your time. So where are you going to spend most of it? And we asked that question, Gallup did, in the US, the UK, France, Canada, China, and Japan. Every single country, more than 70% of parents would say the F. We're raising a whole generation of kids who are being characterized by the people who love them the most, by who they aren't, rather than by who they are. Now, the point isn't here that you should ignore the F. You can't ignore the F. Your child can't fail the class, just like you can't ignore your own weaknesses. You can't. But that wasn't the question. The question is, where would you grow the most? You need to live by this truth. Let's have this truth up here. It's an obvious one. You'll grow most where you're already strong. That's why Tiger Woods is rebuilding his swing, because he's already got the best one on the tour. That's why when you take Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball player, who, by the way, has a glaring weakness, what is it? Free throws. That's why when he joined the LA Lakers, they said, we're going to stop working on free throws, and we're going to work on your play in the paint, under the basket. And he said, I'm already the best in the league. And they said, but you could be the best ever, and you're not yet. And he won the scoring title 3 years in a row. The Lakers happened to win the title 3 years in a row. And oh, by the way, his free throw percentage jumped 20 points. He went from terrible to really bad, but it got better. And that's, I mean, if you think about what a strengths-based conversation is like as a leader or as a parent. What's your name? Sue? Susan. So if I'm saying to Susan, let's say I'm a leader of Susan, and I figure out that she's a focused person. When everyone else is losing their head, she can stay focused, she can stay on track. By focusing on strengths, I don't mean that you go, hey Susan, jolly well done for being focused. You carry on with your focusy self. But I don't do that. I'm going, that's not a strengths-based conversation. A strengths-based one is where you go, hey Susan, all right, I'm going to find out ways you can put yourself in situations where you can use that. What situations can we put you in which will challenge you to be even better than you are right now? What skills can you learn that will sharpen that strength of yours? How can you teach that strength of yours to others? If this is the best you got, Susan, bring it, bring it. I mean, if that strengths-based conversation, if you've ever had one, is very demanding, isn't it? It says, hey, you're good. You could be awesome, and you're not quite yet. Let's step it up. You're the best in the league, Susan. You could be the best ever. Bring it. Now, that's much more challenging for me, because I've got to figure out creative ideas, because you're already good. But that's what leadership's all about. It's not about fixing all your weaknesses. It's about saying, step it up. Oh, and by the way, Susan, if you've got some areas that are Fs, I mean, let's go back to your child for a second. If your child's getting an F in math, there are 2 reasons why they're getting an F. One is they're bad at math. The second is they're really good at math and badly taught. Either way, the way to solve the F is through the A's. You sit down and you talk with your child about the A's, not to pat them on the head, jolly well done, Susan, but to say, hey, why are you interested in those subjects? Why are you so intrigued by those subjects? Why did you learn so much in those subjects? Is it the way you're taught? All the answers you get from that will help you with the F's. Live by that second truth. You'll grow the most where you're strongest. Doesn't mean you don't address your weaknesses. Address them. Just don't call them areas of opportunity. They're not. They're areas of least opportunity. Every one of you in this room have got places where you can grow, but you'll grow most where you're already strong. It's counterintuitive. Now, some of you might go, well, I'd love to do that. I'd love to build a team like that. I'd love to live my life that way. I'd love to be one of the 12%, but I can't, because I work as part of a team. And the team needs me to put aside my strengths for the benefit of the team. Because remember, there's no I in team. I've got to put aside me for the benefit of the team. Isn't that the right, the most honorable thing to do? No. It's the third myth. Let's have that up there. It's the third myth, that a great team member just puts their strengths aside and does whatever it takes to help the team. Because if you look at the best teams, they're not made up of a bunch of well-rounded people all blindly chipping in. They're all living by this truth. Let's have that third truth, if you would. They're all made up of individuals who've bothered to take themselves seriously enough to say, this is where my strengths are, and this is how I can volunteer them to this team. And then I've tried to find people who are strengthened by the very things that weaken me. So the team has become well-rounded precisely because each individual in it isn't. Your chief responsibility as a team member is not some bland chipping inness. What the team needs to know from you is, where are your shoulders broadest? Where can we rely on you the most? What plays can you always run? We need to know that from you, because we can't see through the color of your skin or your sex or your age or your nationality. We can't see inside you. You can. We need to know that from you. And of course, sometimes you're going to have to chip outside your strength zone. But most of the time, we need you to volunteer your strengths to us. If you want to have the best example of a person who's lived their life this way, think recently of Warren Buffett. Remember, he did something really weird last June, didn't he? He gave away $31 billion, which is a little odd. So he held a press conference to explain why he gave it to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And do you remember this? He had two answers when somebody said, why'd you do it? He had two answers. One was really predictable, the other was just bizarre. The predictable one was this. He said, because they can give it away better than I can. Typical pragmatic Buffett answer, right? They are better than me at that, therefore they get the money. And if he'd have left it at that, we'd have chalked it up to Buffett wisdom and off we'd have gone. But he didn't leave it at that. He couldn't. He said, besides, philanthropy is no fun for me. Okay, who says that? I mean, some of us may occasionally think that, but who actually comes out and says that? Who says it's way more fun squeezing one more little ounce of profit out of my companies than it is to increase child inoculation rates around the world? That is tedious and boring, but that, I mean, who says that? Now, you might not think there are any pressures, any social pressures on a billionaire, but one of the pressures on a billionaire is you better find a cause. Well, what he was saying is, I don't have any causes. But think about it. In saying that, he wasn't dismissing or disrespecting the goals of philanthropy. He was saying something much more sophisticated and much more dangerous, much more difficult to grab your head around and actually say out loud. He was saying, look, I so respect the goals of philanthropy, they can't be entrusted to a guy like me. That's leadership. So, if you wanted to become one of those 12%, one of the first things you've got to do is look at those three myths full in the face, blow them up, and put those three truths in their place. As you grow, you become more and more and more who you already are. You'll grow most where you're already strong. And what your team needs of you most of all is for you to take yourself seriously enough to figure out where you can volunteer your best to the team. And the funny thing is, if you can live by those truths, most of us anyway, aren't that far off from becoming one of the 12%. I'm not saying you believe this, but one of the cliches would be that for most of us to have the ideal life, our ideal life is far from the one we're living now. Our ideal life is one where we live in a log cabin in the hills of Oregon, disturbed only by the whinnying of our horse and the scent of the wet trees outside. Maybe that's me. But some special faraway life that's not ours. But weirdly, if you actually ask people, what is your ideal job? 60% of people say either what I'm doing now or a specialized subset of what I'm doing now. If you ask people, how often do you feel an emotional high in your week? How often do you feel an emotional high? More than 50% of people say to me that happens to me at least once a week. If you ask people, how often do you get so focused on what you're doing you lose track of time and forget your troubles? 73% of people say that happens to me at least once a week. So if you wanted to boil this whole strengths revolution down to size, it would be, how do you go from using your strengths in life about once a week, which let's say between 65 and 75% of us say at least once a week. How do you go from using your strengths once a week, where 65% of us do, to most of the time, where 12% of us do? How do you go from once a week to most of the time? I would suggest that if you're going to do that, first you need to believe the right things, but then there are 3 skills you need to learn how to do. This afternoon we don't have time to cover all of them in detail. I'll cover one in detail, but there are 3, and without sounding too Oprah-esque, that's why I wrote the book, so that you could learn the 3 skills. That was a bit Oprah-esque, but I didn't know what else to say. Here are the 3 skills. First, you need to this is going to sound obvious. You need to identify what your strengths are. And most of us are just rotten at that. I've interviewed thousands and thousands of people on the question, describe your strengths. And you know the most common answer? You want to know by far the most common answer? I like working with people. Yes, I do. I am a people person. Yes, I am. People and me, we're like that, we are. We're like that, people and me. No mention of which people. No mention of what you're doing with the people. Are you selling to them? Are you serving them? Are you saving them? What are you doing with the people? Just people. Me and people. You got to get specific. I'm going to spend a wee bit of time on that issue. And it's not just if you take a personality test like StrengthsFinder or Myers-Briggs. You got to get more vivid than that even. But that's the first thing. What are your strengths? Second, you got to change something. Each week, put together a strong week plan. No pun intended. Week, W-E-E-K. A strong week plan. Each week, you should have 2 things you're going to do to push your time toward your strengths and away from those things that weaken you. Each week, push your time toward your strengths. Think of the most effective people you know. Just get them in your head for a minute. Don't they seem to spend a disproportionate amount of time doing things that invigorate them? Well, that didn't happen by accident. They didn't just happen upon the perfect job. They gradually, each week, deliberately tilted their playing field and pushed their time deliberately towards certain activities and away from others. They made the best of their job into most of their job. You should do the same. Each week, put together a strong week plan. Third, you need to be able to talk about your strengths without bragging and your weaknesses without whining. You've got to be able to talk about your strengths in a persuasive enough way to get people around you to want to help you do what you want to do, which is build your job around the best of you. And that's hard. Most of the time when we say we have a strength, it sounds like we're boasting. Hi, I have empathy. Yes, I do. Empathy. I'm strategic. Yes, I am. I'm just I don't know where it came from. I'm just strategic. Oh, you're not? Oh dear. I am. Right? And how about your weaknesses? It's hard to talk about your weaknesses without sounding like you're a whiner. I mean, for those of you that are leaders, many of you obviously are, it's hard to walk in. By the time you're a leader, you're supposed to be well-nigh perfect, aren't you? It's hard to walk into a situation and go, you know what, I'm a leader, but I have no vision at all. Just can't see anything out there. It's crazy. And yet there are some leaders, I mean, if you think about the presidential candidates that are going to run for the President of the United States, they couldn't be any more different. Some of them have vision, some of them are great managers, some of them are conceptual, some of them are less conceptual, some of them are very energetic, some of them are more strategic than energetic. Every one of them will be a wee bit different. But it's a brave leader who can figure out a way to say, I am weakened by this activity, and not sound like a whiner. Now, again, I don't have time to go through every one of those 3 skills, but let's start with the first one. What are your strengths? What are your strengths? Yes, you can take personality profiles. Absolutely. Take StrengthsFinder if you haven't. Take Myers-Briggs if you haven't. Take DISC if you haven't. Those are all very good mind preparers. They get you thinking a bit about who you are and what you bring. But if I wanted to get any one of you to identify your strengths, here's what I'd get you to do. I would say do this. Take a blank, and I would encourage you to do exactly this next week. And this isn't hard. You've just never done it before. Take a blank sheet of paper around with you, or a blank pad, and draw a line down the middle of the page. And on the right-hand column, at the top of it, write, I loved it. And on the left-hand side, write, I loathed it. Right? And then take it around with you for a whole week. And any time you find yourself doing something that invigorates you, scribble it down. Don't wait until the end of the day. Don't wait until the end of the week and try and recreate it. As you're doing it, scribble it down. And as you're thinking about which activities invigorate you and which don't, look for these 4 very simple and clear signs of a strength. 4 simple signs of a strength. Here's what they are, and they follow the acronym SIGN, which is convenient. The S stands for success. So I would say to you next week, any activity that you feel effective at, scribble it down. As you're doing it, if as you're doing it, you feel like you have what's called self-efficacy, you feel effective, regardless of whether anyone else tells you you're good, any activity where you feel successful, scribble it down. What were you doing? But that's not the only sign of a strength, is it? Why? Because there are some things you're quite successful at that if you never had to do them again, it would be too soon. Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird? You're really good at some things you hate doing. And the annoying thing is people keep asking you to do it because you're good at it. It's a strange curse, isn't it? I once interviewed this chap who was a wonderful swimmer. At the age of 6, he had the most beautiful crawl stroke, freestyle stroke. And so this lifeguard who saw him swim said to his mom, hey, you've got to put him in swim school. He's just got the most natural swimming stroke I've ever seen. And he went off and he was put in swim camp, and he became really, really good at swimming. I mean, awesomely good, so that he won meet after meet after meet. In the state of California, he's got record after record. But at the age of 17, he realized that he was getting, before every meet, every swim meet, debilitating migraines. He was blessed with the wonderful ability to swim and cursed with no appetite for it. Well, you'll have something like that, won't you? You'll have a bunch of things. You're good at them. You can do them. You just wish you didn't. A strength isn't what you're good at, is it? Because what would you call those things that you're good at that you don't want to do? There must be more to a strength than just success. There are. There are 3 other signs. Here's the first one. Instinct. The I stands for instinct. Any activity next week that you find yourself looking forward to doing, write it down. You're not looking forward to everything next week, are you? But there are some very specific things in the week next week that even as you're listening to me now, you're thinking about it. You're kind of, So if you find yourself looking forward to an activity in a week, scribble it down. The G stands for growth. Some activities next week, as you're doing them, time will seem to speed up and whip by, and you'll look up and whole hours will have gone by. If you're using your strength, it's like your synapses are firing and your whole brain is growing. It's like your whole brain is just growing while you're doing them. Flip that around. There'll be some activities next week where as you're doing them, you won't be able to concentrate at all. Time will seem to slow down to a crawl. If you can't concentrate on an activity, it's a pretty good sign that it's not a strength. The N stands for needs. When you're done with some activities next week, it's like you were put here to do that thing. You may be tired, but you're not drained. You're the opposite of drained. There are some activities next week that will leave you feeling like that, whatever that word is. That word. It'll be like it fulfilled a need of yours. Scribble that down. Go through, seriously, go through a whole week just capturing those specific activities that make you feel, while you're doing them, you feel effective. Before you do them, you look forward to doing them. While you're doing them, you can concentrate like your whole brain is firing and growing. And when you're done with them, it's like you've fulfilled a need of yours. You need to pay extraordinarily close attention to how certain activities in a week make you feel. Because how they make you feel will drive how good you get at them. Do you follow me? In the language of sign, let's just put sign back up again real quick. In the language of sign, the I, the G, and the N drive the S. Your appetites drive your abilities. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, wait a minute. There are some activities in my week that I look forward to doing. I've got an instinct for them. There's a lot of G, growth. When I'm doing them, time whips by. When I'm done with them, I feel good. Lots of I, lots of G, lots of N, no S. What do you call those? Lots of appetite, no ability. What do you call that? Well, we have a word for that. We have a word for activities where you have a lot of appetite and no ability. We call those hobbies. And that's why they stay hobbies, because no one's relying on you to do them. But it's weird. Back in the real world, the world of other people's expectations of you, back in the world of your role, your responsibilities in your family or your company or your organization or your church, it's weird how quickly we dismiss that as a luxury. Very few of us in our real world maintain a strong appetite for activities we're manifestly bad at. Now, sometimes you'll see people yearning for a job that brings with it prestige and title. But when you actually drill down into the activities of that job, most of us don't misdiagnose what we're drawn to. I mean, somebody that on your team might say to you, I want to be a leader, because it carries with it that kind of aura of specialness and prestige. But if you drill down and you go, all right, do you love being responsible for other people's problems? Do you love that? Do you love having your entire reputation in someone else's hands? Do you love that? Do you love being entirely responsible for what other people do when you're not there to tell them to do it? Do you love that? Because that's the job. It's like I used to do a lot of work with Merrill Lynch, and people would say, I would love to be a stockbroker. Oh, really? Do you love calling people up again and again, maybe 200 times a week, and asking them for money? And hearing 195 no's? Do you love that deep, consistent, personal rejection? Do you love that? Because that's the job. And you know what's weird? Some of you in this room do love that. Some of you love hearing no's. Some of you in this room are energized and invigorated by turning people around. Some of you hate it. But it's weird. Back in the real world, very few people misdiagnose what they're drawn to. So next week, seriously, do this. Tease apart your week. Look for those 4 signs and write down the activities that you get. By the end of the week, you'll have about 12 to 15 I loved it's, and 12 to 15 I loathed it. And here's what I would encourage you to do. Look at the I loved it column and pick your 3 strongest, the ones that just blew you away before you did them. And then write 3 strength statements. 3 statements that are written by you in your handwriting, in your language, that begin with the phrase, I feel strong when. Because a strength is not what you're good at. A strength is an activity that makes you feel strong. Your strengths are those activities that make you feel strong. Here's an example. When I went through it, one of the top activities I'd written down was, I loved interviewing Rosa. Rosa was a housekeeping supervisor for Hampton Inn, at the LAX Hampton Inn. But she was excellent at her job. There's 1,300 Hampton Inns. She was the best executive housekeeper they had. And I was sitting down in the break room asking her why she was so good at what she did. Again, this might sound incredibly tedious to you, but for me, all of the different signs of a strength were there. I felt effective at it. Before I talked to her, I looked forward to doing it. While we were doing it, time whipped by, and when I was done with it, I was all kind of tingly. I mean, it's weird. So out of that, I'm looking at that, and I go, all right, I will write a strength statement from this. And this is what it became. Let's put that up. I feel strong when I interview someone who excels at his job and explore why he excels. Now, when you look at that, I don't know, maybe that's boring to you. Maybe that doesn't move you at all. And that often happens with strength statements. Other people look at them, they're not very exciting. But I look at that, that rocks my world. When I look at that statement, that is incredibly powerfully clarifying for me. Emotion created it. When I read that, it helps me see what I'm supposed to do in the world. That's one of the wonderful things about defining a strength this way, is that is that you are the authority on your strengths. You are the authority on what makes you feel strong. If you define a strength as an activity that you're good at, then the person least qualified to identify them is you. So from a very early age, you were taught not to trust your own instincts about your strengths, weren't you? You were taught to look to your teachers to confirm whether you had a strength or not, or your parents, or your manager at work. Yes, you have a strength. No, you don't. You weren't to be trusted. You would either be too hard on yourself or too generous, depending on how fragile your ego was. But if a strength is an activity that makes you feel strong, then no one knows them better than you do. When I get done at the end of the week, let's put that back up, and I go, I feel strong when I interview someone who excels at their job and explore why they excel. No one can come to me and go, no, you don't. They can say to me, there's a better way to do that, Marcus. Here are better questions to ask. Here's a better way to write up what you found. Here's a better way to incorporate that into a book or they can say all that. That is great performance feedback, and I should be open to it. But what no one knows better than me is which activities I'm drawn to and which ones repel me, which intrigue me and which bore me, which I love and which I loathe. No one knows them better than me. And I knew them at 6, and so do you. So take a week and do this. And the power of yours, when you do them, when you have 3, the power of yours will be in their specificity. This doesn't say, I like interviewing people. You know why it doesn't say that? You know why it doesn't say, I feel strong when I interview people? You know why? Because I don't. I had a job when I worked for Gallup, which was all about interviewing people who were struggling leaders to try and help them be better leaders. Today, we would call that an executive coach role. I should have liked it. I was really good at it, and it bored me to tears. I wish it didn't. For no good reason that I can think of, I am not invigorated at all about interviewing people who are struggling to find out why they're struggling. I'm only intrigued by Rosa, and I'm just being fully candid about this. I'm only intrigued by Rosa because she's really good. But I would much more be excited about the idea of interviewing a fabulous executive housekeeper than a bad leader. For whatever reason, I'm intrigued by excellence. And I also don't want to interview Rosa about her political beliefs. I don't want to interview Rosa about her relationships. I want to, let's put that back up one more time. I want to interview someone who's good to explore why they're good. When you get done with this in your regular week of life, you should have 3 strength statements that are powerful, drawn from your own experience, and specific. And then the challenge for your life will be, as is the challenge for my life, how do I take that insight and make sure that every week I'm figuring out 2 ways to play to that strength a wee bit more this week than I did last week? Any week, guys, any week where I play to any aspect of that. It could be the setting up the right interview aspect. It could be preparing the questions aspect. It could be the actually doing the interview aspect. It could be the writing up my discoveries aspect. It could be the sharing of the discoveries aspect. But any week where I deliberately play to some aspect of that strength will be a powerful and productive week for me. And the same will apply to you. But the reason it's so important for you to own this is that no one knows this about me. When you write your 3 strength statements, no one will know that better than you. Your challenge will be to look at those 3 strength statements in the face and figure out how each week you can deliberately play to some aspect of those activities that strengthen you. If you can learn how to do that, when faced with a world, frankly, guys, that is ambivalent about you and your strengths. The world quite likes your strengths if it helps you get something done, but is kind of annoyed with your strengths if it leads you off in a different direction. The world is blind, really, to you and your strengths, in which case the only person who can take responsibility for putting your strengths to work is you. And it starts with you having some kind of strength statement that is powerful, vivid, true, and drawn from your own experience. If you can do that, then you can start gradually becoming one of the 12%. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. There'll be times when you'll go back, you'll use your strengths, and then because you're using your strengths, you'll be successful, and somebody will give you another opportunity. Door after door will open for you, some of which will allow you to play to your strengths. Many won't. And you'll have to stay clear-headed enough to figure out which doors to march through and which doors to slam shut. So it won't always be easy, and it won't be without risk. There'll be risks on this strengths journey of yours. Risk that one day you'll go back, you'll use all your strengths, and you won't be successful. Like Jack, my son, will take all of his competitiveness, go all out, and not win. That's hard, isn't it? Because you got no excuse. You went for it, you still didn't get it done. That's a bitter pill to swallow. Or there's the risk that you'll go back with your team and share your strengths, and they won't get what you're talking about. They'll think you're trying to brag that you're good at this job, or you're trying to hand all the rotten jobs off to somebody else. The new guy, here, take this. There's risk, but there's a lovely line on risk from Anais Nin, and I thought I would end with it. She wrote this. She said, "And the day came when the risk it took to remain tight in the bud became greater than the risk it took to blossom. And the day came when the risk it took to remain all tight in the bud became greater than the risk it took to blossom." Well, today should be that day for you. Because yes, there are risks to blossoming. There are risks to betting your service, your contribution, your significance on your strengths. But I would argue that for you, from this day forward, the risks of not doing so are far greater. Because here's what I believe. I believe that everybody in this room, everyone watching, has strengths. No one is strengthless. You aren't. Those girls at Purnell, no one is strengthless. Everyone has some activities that make them feel strong. Second, I believe that no one's got quite the same configuration of strengths and weaknesses as you do. The least interesting thing about me is that I'm a 41-year-old man from England. All the really interesting uniquenesses of me lie beneath the surface of my race, or my sex, or my age, or my nationality. All the really intriguing uniquenesses lie beneath the surface. And I believe the same is true of you. Third, I believe that you'll make your greatest contribution in life to those you're seeking to serve and those you're seeking to lead when you, by yourself, figure out how to contribute your strengths most of the time. And last, I believe that everyone will win when you do. You'll win. Your team will win, your family will win, your community will win, your church will win, your company will win, the country will win. Everyone will win when you take that responsibility. That's what I believe. But it doesn't matter what I believe. You've just seen the data. It clearly doesn't matter what I believe. In the end, it matters only what you believe. Now, I don't know what you thought you were going to get out of this last time that we've got this afternoon. I don't know what your expectations were. But I would leave you with this. Let tomorrow be a different day than it was today. Let tomorrow be a slightly stronger day than it was today. By which I simply mean, let tomorrow begin with you looking in the mirror and saying to yourself, what are my strengths and how can I volunteer them today? And then let every day thereafter start the same way. Because then and only then will we get to see the best of you. Then and only then will you really be able to lead from here. Thanks for inviting me.